The moment he stepped through the glass doors, the energy in the room shifted, but not in the way it should have. The sunlight lit up his tailored charcoal gray suit, his clean-shaven jawline, and the quiet power in his walk. But instead of greetings, he was met with glances. Suspicious ones. The kind that didn't ask, "Can I help you?" They asked, "Why are you here?" He walked past a white couple being offered sparkling water, past a teenage boy who was being shown a car with a bow on it. No one approached him. No smile, no clipboard, just silence. He stopped in front of a $200,000 coupe, the kind of car that got roped off in most showrooms. He didn't touch it, didn't ask for a test drive, just stood there, studying it with the eyes of someone who'd seen engineering from the inside out. And then, like clockwork, it came. The voice. Sharp. Suspicious. "Sir, this area is for serious buyers only." The manager appeared with a plastic smile that didn't reach his eyes. White, mid-40s, overpriced watch, and the kind of smugness that screamed inherited authority. The man looked at him calmly. "I was just admiring the build. I might be interested in this model." The manager let out a short, condescending laugh. "Right. Well, let's not waste your time. These vehicles start at $250,000. Maybe check out something more accessible." There was a beat of silence. The man didn't flinch. "Could I speak to the owner of this dealership?" The manager smirked, tapped his chest, and said, "You're looking at him." "So, if there's nothing else—" He waved a hand as if dismissing a child. That's when the man smiled. But it wasn't amused. It was quiet, knowing, dangerous in the calmest way possible. He didn't say another word. Just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black folder. He placed it on the hood of the car. The manager didn't look at it. Not yet. "But you should, before we go any further. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever been judged before anyone knew who you really were? Tap like if you believe dignity shouldn't depend on your clothes or your color. And hit subscribe, because what's about to happen inside this dealership will leave everyone speechless, especially the one who thought he was in charge." The manager didn't move at first. His smirk lingered for a second too long, like someone too sure of his place in the world. But something about the man's silence, his stillness, began to unsettle the room. Slowly, the manager reached for the folder, flipping it open with one hand while glancing around, as if expecting a prank. What he saw inside made the blood drain from his face. A certificate of ownership. Corporate registration documents. A business card embossed with a name he didn't recognize, because it had never needed to be on a billboard. But at the bottom, in crisp black letters, was the truth. Owner. Aegis Automotive Group, parent company of Lexington Motors. The man didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between them was louder than any confrontation. The manager's lips parted, but no words came out. His hand trembled slightly as he closed the folder, trying and failing to regain composure. I didn't realize," he muttered, his voice suddenly void of the arrogance it carried just minutes ago. The man raised an eyebrow, still calm. "You didn't realize because you never cared to ask. That's the problem." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The weight of those words hung in the air like a judgment passed down from a higher court. At the front desk, the receptionist had gone pale. Salespeople who had ignored him moments earlier were now whispering among themselves. One of them pulled out his phone, discreetly searching the company name he just overheard. The search results confirmed it. The man standing in front of them wasn't a customer. He was their boss. Their silence screamed guilt. Just then, a black SUV pulled up outside. A sharply dressed woman stepped out holding a leather binder and a phone to her ear. The manager turned just in time to see the regional director approaching. Her expression was unreadable. She walked in without greeting anyone and made a direct line to the man. "Mr. Jordan, I came as soon as I got the call," she said respectfully. He gave a slight nod, then gestured toward the manager. "Start with him." The words hadn't even settled before the regional director turned to the manager. Her heels clicked sharply across the floor, each step slicing through the stunned silence like a blade. "Bradley," she said, her tone surgical, "I need your badge, your access code, and your office keys. Now." The man blinked. Once, twice. Wait, I think there's been some misunderstanding." She cut him off without blinking. "The misunderstanding," she said coldly, "is thinking your title gave you the right to treat a client like trash. Let alone the man who signs your checks." Every employee in the room had stopped pretending to work. Phones were down, conversations silenced. The showroom had become a stage, and the lead actor was being stripped of his role. The manager's face had turned a shade paler than the marble floor beneath him. "I didn't know who he was," he stammered. "He didn't introduce himself as the owner." Mr. Jordan finally spoke, calm and deliberate. "I didn't have to. You treat strangers one way and owners another. That says everything." He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. His restraint only made the humiliation land harder. The regional director handed the man a plain envelope. "You'll be contacted by HR within the hour. Until then, security will escort you to collect your things." Security didn't have to be called. They were already approaching, professional, silent, efficient. One of them gently touched the manager's arm. "Sir." That one word hit harder than any accusation. The man looked around the showroom as if someone might defend him. No one did. The same people he used to bark orders at now stared through him like he didn't exist. And in that moment, he didn't. Not here, not anymore. Mr. Jordan watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with silence, the kind of silence that comes from years of being on the receiving end of subtle humiliation, from walking into rooms where your money didn't matter, from seeing respect handed to everyone but you. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The truth had spoken for him, and it echoed louder than any title ever could. As the manager was escorted out, the glass door shut behind him with a hiss that felt final. No one dared move. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, uncomfortable, the kind that exposes everything people try to hide behind small talk and polished smiles. Mr. Jordan didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, letting the weight of what had just happened settle across the room like fog. Eyes darted away from his, backs straightened, hands folded nervously. For the first time in years, the staff felt seen, but not in the way they were used to. Now, they were being evaluated by the man they had judged too quickly. Finally, he turned to face them. "If you've worked here long enough, you know exactly what had just happened," he said, voice steady. "And if you felt even a second of guilt while watching it, that's a start." A few employees lowered their eyes. Others nodded faintly, regret flickering in their posture. But one young man, standing near the back of the showroom, didn't look away. His name tag read Aaron, and he was the only one who had taken a step forward when Mr. Jordan entered earlier. He had hesitated, wanted to help, but had been pulled back by a glare from the former manager. Now, that moment came rushing back. Mr. Jordan's gaze found him. "What's your name?" he asked. The young man straightened. "Aaron, sir. You're the only one who moved when I walked in." Aaron swallowed, unsure how to respond. I just thought you might need help." Mr. Jordan gave a slow nod. "You did, and you weren't wrong." He turned to the regional director. "Effective immediately, he's moving into senior sales. Double his commission tier. Let's see what he does when no one's in his way." Gasps rippled through the room, not out of jealousy, but clarity. One act of decency had changed everything for Aaron. The unspoken message settled over the rest like a quiet verdict. What you do when no one's watching defines what happens when they finally are. Mr. Jordan turned back to the group. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about standards. Starting today, we serve everyone like they own the building. Because one day, they just might." The next morning, it wasn't just the staff who walked differently. The entire city felt the shift. A video, taken quietly by one of the junior finance reps, had made its way to social media overnight. It started with a quiet man in a suit asking a simple question, and ended with the dealership manager being walked out in shame. The clip, less than 2 minutes long, exploded across platforms. The caption said it all. "Black CEO gets denied service at his own dealership. Watch what happens." By sunrise, it had over 2 million views. At corporate headquarters, phones were already ringing. Emails piled into the press inbox. Journalists requested statements. Franchise owners called emergency meetings. But Mr. Jordan wasn't hiding from the spotlight. He had never been the kind of man who needed to speak loudly to be heard. That morning, he sat calmly in a simple chair, across from a local news anchor, the dealership name faintly visible behind him through the office glass. "Why didn't you reveal who you were right away?" the anchor asked. Mr. Jordan paused, then answered with the kind of clarity that didn't require explanation. "Because the way they treated me without knowing is the real story." That line was clipped, shared, and stitched into every repost. Celebrities weighed in. Business influencers broke down what it meant. Civil rights leaders called it poetic justice. But inside the dealership, the impact wasn't noise. It was movement. Diversity consultants were brought in before lunch. Training manuals were pulled and rewritten by evening. Anonymous complaint boxes were installed. And for the first time in its history, the luxury brand that had quietly tolerated bias was now under the microscope. Aaron, the newly promoted sales rep, stood by the front desk that day and watched as a young black couple walked in, nervous, unsure if they belonged. He stepped forward without hesitation, greeted them like they were royalty, and led them to the very same coupe Mr. Jordan had admired. Somewhere in the back office, Mr. Jordan watched quietly through the security feed, not for surveillance, but for change. Real change. That evening, long after the showroom lights dimmed and the buzz faded into quiet, Mr. Jordan sat alone in his home office. Not at a desk, not in a chair, on the floor, back against the wall, holding a photograph so old the edges had curled inward with time. In it, a boy no older than 12 leaned under the hood of a rusted Buick, grease on his cheeks, laughter frozen in black and white. Beside him, a man, his father, smiled with pride. Not because the car was worth anything, but because his son had learned how to make something run, even when the world called it broken. He hadn't come from wealth. His first wrench was second-hand. His first car sale was through a borrowed office. And every meeting he walked into, every investor pitch, every handshake, he had to prove he wasn't someone's assistant, someone's driver, someone pretending. That's why, when the manager tried to brush him off like another stranger wasting showroom air, he didn't flinch. He'd been trained by years of quiet disrespect, the kind that came dressed in smiles and policy. But what that manager never understood, what most of the world never understood, was that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's just control. Sometimes it's a man choosing when to speak, how to strike, and why to wait. On the wall near his desk hung a shadow box. Inside it, his father's final gift. The same wrench from the photograph, polished, engraved with just 3 words, "Know your worth." He stared at it for a long time. Not because he needed to remember, but because it reminded him who he did this for. Not just for himself, but for the mechanic's son who might walk into that dealership tomorrow and wonder if he'd be seen. Outside his window, the streetlights buzzed softly. Cars passed. Lives moved. And somewhere across town, a young black boy told his mother he wanted to sell cars when he grew up, because he saw someone like him do it with power, without shouting, without backing down. And that, Mr. Jordan thought, was the real sale. 2 weeks later, the corporate board met behind closed doors. Only this time the silence wasn't about discomfort. It was about listening. At the head of the table sat Mr. Jordan, no longer the invisible force behind the curtain, but the man whose quiet resistance had become headline news. The media may have moved on to other stories, but inside the company, the aftershocks hadn't stopped. Executives, who once dismissed customer experience as a PR phrase, now leaned in with real concern. Because for the first time in their polished careers, they understood what it meant when silence wasn't compliance, but strategy. The presentation was simple. No flashy slides. Just data, truth, and one firm proposal. A company-wide audit of hiring practices, mandatory bias training across all locations, and the formation of a Customer Dignity Council, staffed by employees from every level, not just executives. When one VP raised concerns about brand image, Mr. Jordan simply said, "You're thinking of the brand as a logo. I'm thinking of it as a mirror." No one argued after that. A week later, signs across every dealership began to change, not for marketing, but for meaning. Where once there were framed awards, now hung portraits of team members with their stories. "This is Aaron. He spoke up." "This is Dana. She listened." "This is Marcus. He leads now." And in one corner of every showroom a small plaque was mounted into the wall. It didn't bear Mr. Jordan's name. It bore a message. Power is how you treat people when you think they're nobody. Customers noticed. Staff behaved differently. And most importantly, people who had never felt welcome in those spaces now walked in with shoulders unburdened. The ripple had become a current. And yet Mr. Jordan stayed away from the cameras. He didn't tour locations or give interviews. Instead, he watched from a quiet office, reviewing reports, mentoring young staff, and rebuilding something bigger than a brand. He was reshaping the standard. Because it had never been about revenge. It was about recognition. And now, the world was finally starting to see. Months passed. The headlines faded. The noise around the scandal dulled, as it always does. But in quiet corners of the city, something deeper had taken root. Inside every dealership, the change wasn't in policy memos or press releases. It was in posture, in how the eyes met across a showroom, in the way silence was no longer used to dismiss, but to listen. Mr. Jordan rarely visited the locations anymore. He didn't need to. His presence lived in the culture. But that day, something pulled him back to the same glass doors he once walked through, unseen. Rain tapped gently against the windows as he stood at a distance, watching the present unfold. A boy, maybe 19, maybe younger, stood under the dealership's awning, soaked through. Cheap sneakers, nervous eyes, a resume folded like he'd held it too long. He looked unsure, like he already expected to be turned away before stepping inside. But then the doors opened, and Aaron stepped out. No longer a junior associate, no longer afraid to speak. He didn't ask questions. He didn't scan him top to bottom. He just smiled, extended a hand, and said, "Come in." Mr. Jordan watched it all from across the street, a quiet breath catching in his chest. Because in that single gesture, in that one act of dignity, he saw something far bigger than a policy change. He saw the future correcting itself. Not with applause, not with force, but with a choice. And if you, watching this, have ever been judged for how you looked before anyone asked who you were, this story wasn't just about a dealership. It was about you. Drop a "they didn't see me, but I kept walking" in the comments if you've lived that moment. Because your story matters, even if no one believed it the first time. Like this video if you believe that true power isn't in owning the room, it's in how you welcome the ones who were never invited. And follow this channel, not for stories, but for echoes of what we've lived, what we've survived, and what we're finally ready to change. Until next time, be the person someone prayed would show up. And when you hold the door open, hold it like it was once closed on you.